In the first video, we discussed how Western philosophical thought emerged from the remnant mystery school teachings of a fast-collapsing Egyptian empire. It has only been 1.5 centuries since science replaced religious and philosophical thought as the vehicle for truth and revelation. So we tend to forget the enormous debt we owe and how deeply these streams of thought shaped our modern reasoning, dialectic, logic, and ethics. As we begin to unpack the ideas which loosely informed the Christian Trinity, the concept of philosophical and religious dualism is quite central. From this point of view, the world is composed of binary opposites: heaven and earth, God and man, mind and matter, the mortal body and the immortal soul. Centuries of thought went into the effort to try and resolve, for instance, the nature of the mind, the soul, the body, and how they might coexist and their relationship to each other. In fact, the question as to whether mind or consciousness emerges from matter, or the other way round, was pondered thousands of years ago by the Greeks, and later by the German schools of philosophy, and is still contentious today. During the last video, you might have noticed some very interesting background pictures. Most of these are the artworks of Robert Fludd and Athanasius Kircher, who could properly be called polymaths and true Renaissance men. The one we're looking at right now is a particular favourite of mine, because it includes all the most important ideas we'll cover over the next several videos. Fludd and Kircher were products of the great revival of Hermeticism during the Renaissance. And this movement shares important features with Greek Hermeticism, which flourished in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Both were, for instance, convinced that a perennial knowledge of unknown origin had been perpetuated through one or another means throughout the ages, the so-called Prisca Theologia, or if you like, pure ancient theology. And this deeply inspired them to study the diverse philosophical, religious, and even occult ideologies of antiquity. Isaac Newton was one of the many well-known figures who took the idea of Prisca Theologia very seriously, and his diligent research informed his worldview. The first Hermetics emerged from a very interesting religious philosophical milieu, and during a period when a kind of religious existential crisis gripped the Western religious world. Many seekers of transcendent truth sought the isolation of the Seats Desert to meditate and reflect, to look inwardly for inspiration and revelation. The best known of these seeker groups were probably the so-called Desert Fathers, but the Gnostics, Coptics, Orthodox and heterodox Jews, Neoplatonists, ascetics, Christian hermits, and even Eastern monastics all took to the Seats and other deserts at the time. So many seekers headed for the desert, in fact, that Athanasius of Alexandria wrote, "The desert has become a city." There was a free exchange of ideology, insight and practice between these loosely aligned groups, driven by an earnest desire to encounter some form of transcendent truth, and sometimes to escape persecution. So the Hermetics of that period drew not only on the pool of knowledge left under the pen name of Hermes Trismegistus, but also the ideological riches of those desert-dwelling sects, as well as the Coptics, the Platonists, Neoplatonists, and the occult and mystery school teachings of antiquity. In a similar fashion, the Hermetics of the Renaissance drew on all streams of religious philosophical ideology that had passed before, as well as orthodox scripture and their own, often highly developed knowledge of maths, geometry, art, science, music, and particularly symbolism. In keeping with the prevailing Renaissance attitude, they sought to understand the world and the human being with a specific intention of improving it. People often suppose that the Hermetics drew almost exclusively on the historical literature attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, but actually they cast their net much wider than this, And although these great Hermeticists were spectacularly wrong in some of their conclusions, they brought a lot of insight to the table and paved the way for modern science. The esoteric religious symbol, so evident in Hermetic artwork, is valuable because it has considerable advantages over other representations of knowledge, for as long as the symbolic representation endures intact. It can be rendered in a narrative or graphic form. It doesn't suffer through translation and transliteration, and unlike orthodox religious texts, it is highly resistant to selective editing and alteration. Most importantly, it can carry layers of meaning from the obvious and controversial right through to the layers that the Hermetics, the Gnostics, the Essenes, and many other groups before and since were interested in. The books of the New and Old Testaments are full of these symbolic representations, mostly in narrative form, though they are scarcely recognised and understood, and this, as much as anything else, has ensured their survival. So with Flood's beautiful and informative artwork as a backdrop, let's explore the world of God, the material world, and the human being to see to what extent that which is above is like that which is below. To do this, we can begin by defining what we mean by the idea of one, as represented by the monad of monotheism. We are used to using numbers as mathematical or transactional quantities, but in the sphere of esoteric religious symbolism, one represents a series of related ideas and is often represented by a circle. A circle can represent the world of the individual human being, for instance, without any reference to any divisions we might find within. It can represent the world of matter, the world of God, the world of organic life, music, or anything else that can be taken as one. This particular piece of artwork by Flood is an incomplete representation, with the three important symbols describing only the most fundamental properties of the material world. But we can study the full representation of these ideas right now. In the context of mystery school teachings and aspects of Christian ideology, the inner triangle within the circle of the all and everything represents the three aspects attributed to God which fill all phenomena and all manifestations within the universe. This symbolic representation of the three aspects of the one God in relation to the circle of all and everything is often encountered in religious symbolism. The world of matter has four aspects, and so it is symbolically represented by the square in esoteric religious symbolism. So the square inside the triangle is designed to convey the idea that the material world is a product of the three aspects we call God, and occurs within the boundaries of these three aspects. Now we can look at that part of this picture that Flood emphasized. Our world, the earth, also contains the three aspects attributed to God and the four aspects of materiality. So it is a like representation of the manifest and unmanifest properties represented in Western religion as God and his creation. Now the inner circle represents a human being. Flood only alludes to the idea that the human being is designed in a like manner, perhaps for reasons of aesthetic, or to compel the viewer to make the connection for themselves. But we see this explicit representation in other Hermetic art. Flood's emphasis on fundamental dualism is also important, mainly because it gives us an order of emanation, although it makes other suggestions that I won't go into here. The dyad emerges from the monad, the triad emerges from the dyad, the tetrad emerges from the triad. The dyad is, at the same time, an incomplete rendering of the triad, so really we only need the circle, the square, and the triangle to provide the architecture from which to understand the three worlds of interest, and especially the world with the greatest interest and relevance to us, the human being. This schematic is also found in the East, most famously in this artwork from 18th century Japanese monk Sangai Gibbon, which is called the universe, or Maru, Sankaku, Shikaku. Let's begin then with the three circles. The first represents the undifferentiated world of God. The second is the undifferentiated universe, or the material world, which we will look at from its emergence according to current scientific thought. And the third is the world of the individual, the whole person without reference to gender or any other assumed or actual distinctions. Now we can look at the same representations from a dualist point of view. We can conceive God as the binary opposites of heaven and earth, God and creation, or God and humanity, since the opposing ideas are material, finite, quantifiable, and ephemeral, whereas God is infinite, immortal, without form, and eternal. Since nothing exists apart from God, from the Western religious perspective, the material world is a binary opposite aspect of God. The fundamental pairing of binary opposites also occurred during the Big Bang, which marks the birth of the material world, when equal amounts of matter and antimatter were released. These, according to science, were the first emergent fundamental properties of the universe. And finally, the individual is a composite of psychical and physiological properties, mind and matter, if you like. In our current scientific paradigm, mind is seen as a distinct, although emergent property of matter, although no scientist can write the first line of how thoughts emerge from the chemistry and electrical impulses of the brain. The religious esoteric point of view, on the other hand, is that the material world, including the human body, are emergent properties of some higher form of consciousness, which is analogous to concepts like the mind and thought, but not the same. Consciousness, according to Eastern esoteric philosophical ideology, becomes apparent when the mind is either put to sleep in some traditions, through repeating mantras for instance, while in others a state of no mind, as it is sometimes called, is obtained through meditation in the East and West, or by gaining direct mastery of it through other means, so it can be made quiet at will, and true consciousness can be experienced. This distinction between mind and consciousness is quite important, as the two are inevitably conflated in the arguments of material reductionists. In any case, thinking of these three worlds from a dualist perspective is not especially difficult, probably because humanity has involved itself in thinking in terms of opposites throughout history. It is also easy to see why examples such as the sun and moon, and particularly gender, were so often used to illustrate the principle, given how widespread and accessible these allegorical representations were. So no one would deny that mind and matter are fundamentally contrasting aspects of the human being, and I don't have the acumen to dispute the scientific findings that the binary opposites of matter and antimatter were the fundamental properties of the emerging universe. Whether or not the physical world is likewise an emergent property of some higher form of consciousness remains a matter of religious faith, and given that there is no credible scientific hypothesis of how thought emerges from chemistry and electrical impulses, we are safe to say that the reverse is ostensibly a matter of scientific faith. In the next video, we will begin to look at these three worlds from the point of view of triadic arrangement. There is quite a lot of material to work through when I see you next time. Thanks for listening.